In other words, down the road, the day will come when all things wrong will be made right. A long-term solution will be given to all things. In the meantime, Isaiah is saying that there will be a short-term help that the Lord will provide so that we might cope with our struggles that are presently before us. But to keep in mind that beyond the short-term help, there is a long-term solution where God will make all things right. With this news, Isaiah says, God will rectify the injustices of life. In other words, always keep the big picture in mind. And the big picture, friends, isn't today. The big picture is that the day is coming in your life when God will make all things right. That's the big picture. The smaller picture is what we're going through today, this given moment, all of our challenges. And the smaller picture is keep that in mind too. That's where God comes to us and helps us live through those struggles of life today. But it's because of the big picture that we are able to trust God's help with the small picture of today. What I'm asking of you today is that when your near picture of today seems overwhelming, remember the big picture of your life, that very time when God will make all things right for you. Don't lose sight of the big picture. I love Big 12 football. As you all know, before there was a Big 12, there was Big 8 football. And my being a fan goes all the way back to those days of being a little boy. There are some great teams, perennial teams, year after year, that play good football in the Big 12. Look how Missouri came along in the last couple of years. Another team that has always been in the Big 8 and the Big 12 is Oklahoma. They are such a powerhouse, always have been. If we can go back in history just a little bit, maybe a decade and a half to 2 decades, there was a family called the Selmans. And a few years ago, there were 3 Selman brothers who played for Oklahoma. And not all at exactly the same time. And they were all American, all 3 of them. But 2 of the brothers, Dewey and Leroy, went on to professional football. And they both happened to play for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm sure some of you remember that. Well, they were very impressive in the NFL, just like all 3 of them were impressive on the collegiate level. But what was really important for us here this morning is not their athletic prowess, as it is the character of these young men. They were brought up on a small farm, and I've never heard of this town before, outside of Eufaula, Oklahoma. Have you ever heard of Eufaula? You have? Some of you have. There were 9 kids altogether, 9 kids, and keep this in mind, there was no running water in their house. There certainly wasn't a television set. And they lived in a 600 square foot house. Imagine, John, raising 9 kids in 600 feet of house. And yet all 9 of those Selman kids have turned out to be really significant adults. They've grown into something. They've made something of their lives. Not just these 3 football players, but all 9 of these kids. And do you know why? Because of their mom and dad. That's why. Oh, sure, they were dirt poor farmers. And by society standards today, They had 2 strikes against them just when they reached their adulthood, being so poor and so isolated from so many other places where maybe they could have had advantages. They went every Sunday, this family of 11, to a country church. And the preacher who preached there, the only preacher that the Selmans ever knew, the preacher who preached there, he'd never been to school. He was just a farmer himself. And yet he would preach the Word of God Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. And the entire family grew up believing that God, if you would take care of everything you can do, God will help you fill in all the rest. And this family of 11 grew up believing that and trusting that. And so that's why they always kept their chins up and they hung in there. They grew up believing that someday the Lord would recognize their struggle and honor them for their faithfulness. And God did that very thing with this family. You see, when you have the big picture in mind, that the day is going to come, and I mean the day is going to come for us too. The day is going to come where everything will be made right. Right. When that's the big picture and you have that in mind, that gives you a motivation to live through the difficult struggle of today, that God is wanting to be right here with us, pulling us through that struggle. But it's so easy for us to lose track of that big picture. When you know that the Lord is ultimately in control of making things right for you, and that He is such a good and caring God, the daily struggles don't seem so overwhelming. And so it was that Isaiah said, "With this news, strengthen those with tired hands, encourage those with weak knees, and say to those who are afraid, be strong and do not fear, for the Lord your God is coming to save you." Can you picture yourself in the position of the Israelites having the prophet say that to you? They needed to hear that. But no less, we need to hear that kind of thing in our personal lives as well.